Thank you, Rosa. Good morning to everyone. I would like, yes, in a way, to follow up on the thoughts of the last panel, and also in trying to answer the questions that are raised in the title of this panel: transnational, transformation, external actors, whatever. I think the first thought is that that should be said that all these processes that we are seeing today have started a long while ago. So it is not just that the Arab Spring came or broke out and then we saw something absolutely new out of nowhere. And I think that probably the most important trend that we see here is the dominance or the relative dominance of the non-governmental actors. We all know that these non-governmental actors have been there, and in this category I would like to especially mention the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamic movements, organizations. These have always been there, but the Arab Spring has given, but already before the Arab Spring, the space has somehow opened for them, the space of maneuver has opened for them, and if they are operating within boundaries, they are operating also across boundaries and across the borders. There is another old actor who has been still there, and although it has been very much related to the government, to the power, and it is the military, the second M, as was mentioned yesterday by Bahgat Korani, the military, which is yet again an old actor, a very important, a decisive actor in practically the whole modern history of the Middle East, the whole region. Sometimes we don't understand how it is possible. We don't agree in principle with this, but then we see that they cannot be avoided. And if there is a new actor, it is the third M, the masses, because I think this is something, or at least the masses are coming forward with a absolute force as a new development. They go out in the street, they start the movements, they start a new phase in the transformation, and in the end, since the masses cannot organize themselves or do not usually organize themselves into big parties or political actors, then they somehow disappear, but still have quite a different relevance than before. So this means that all the relations are reshuffled. It is like a kind of a kaleidoscope. You have had all the elements, but you turn it around, and then there is an absolutely new picture. And as the Arab Spring starts, this is another something that is unexpected. Not only the Arab Spring itself, but they are starting from the outside, it seems, in the same way, but then they are developing in absolutely different ways. From a relatively peaceful transition to a full-scale civil war, and it turns out in the process that the states of the region have become into nation-states. Not just projected nation-state boundaries, but they are increasingly behaving as nation-states. They find things over which they can get into alliance. They find issues over which they have contradictory interests. And I think that politically, from a political point of view, we should rather speak about a group of Arab states over this issue, which may be different from a group of Arab states on another issue. In this process, especially in the phase when it is the Arab Spring, I think no external factor has any role, any decisive role in the transition itself. This doesn't mean, mind you, of course I know that the external powers are still there. They are still having roles and contacts. But how the transition is taking place, they don't have any say in that. And the best example is Egypt. They cannot influence what is taking place. Neither can the EU, and for that matter, Israel is very interestingly quite out of it the whole. And it seems that Israel, except for the Palestinian issue, seems to be as if it was not even in the region. It is staying out of the proceedings. It seems on the whole that the regional dynamics have become relatively more important from now on than the great power influence, although, of course, as I said, the great powers are there. And as said yesterday, one very clear indication is how the Gulf states are coming into the picture. If the EU is not giving funds or not enough funds, or others are not giving funds, then the Gulf states comes in. And that will change the equation, and that is a new phenomenon. I'm not sure that we see where it is going, really, if it is only for a couple of years or if it can be taken granted forever, but we can say that this is something new. Then there is another bunch of problems which has to do with our concepts. We all think that we understand when we say what war or a nation state or these kind of concepts, but then it turns out that in the Middle East these concepts somehow do not fit. We are speaking about war, but war usually means an armed conflict between state parties. And here in the Middle East we have at least two different very specific cases. The Lebanese war, where Hezbollah can draw Israel into war, but then it is the Lebanese state who is getting to war, but the Hezbollah is in the government or out of the government. And of course the Palestinian issue, when we have a nation in ascendi, a state in ascendi, a developing, going towards statehood, but still not yet there. So what do we do with that? And also at the same time, the Middle East now presents all the possible kinds of wars that we have learned to know. A real war, a cold war, a civil war, all together. And it is increasingly the discussion that there is a new Cold War in the Middle East, and in this term it is usually referred to Saudi Arabia and Iran and their relationships. And if we just very briefly look at it, it seems as if two empires who are forced into nation-state boundaries are fighting for influence in the closer region and in the wider region. Now, why do I consider them empires? Because they have a universalist claim to spread their own ideology. I don't think that I have to explain that more. They are never confronting directly through proxies. They are doing proxy wars, and they are usually trying to make use of the weak states and the domestic situation in the weak states surrounding them and trying to gain influence this way. It is usually said that the Iranian-Saudi controversy is between the Shia and the Sunni. I don't really believe that. I think it is there. It is a characteristic of the conflict, but as I see, it is much rather between a revolutionary, an activist kind of behavior, the Islamic revolution in Iran, and a conservatism, a quietism if you like. And this means different styles of making politics. But then this is not the only Cold War that we see in the region. There are other Cold Wars, and here again our concepts have to be changed. There is one within the GCC. We all know that there is Saudi and the United Arab Emirates, and then there is Qatar. We have just hosted the vice foreign minister from Qatar at my institute, and he said, oh, no, this is just a little family feud and it will be taken over, that's no problem. But I think there, at least for the past couple of years and for the moment, there is a very, very interesting development that is going on, and it could also be termed as a Cold War. Then there is another type of Cold War between the Muslim Brotherhood, regionally, not just within one country, and the states of the region, and this is a kind of a controversy, and there is the universalist claim again, but somehow it can be confined to state boundaries. But then what are we going to do with the fourth one, the Islamic State or the ISIS? Is it a state in ascendi, as the Palestinians, we call the Palestinians? They claim that they are going forward a state. I don't know if this is real statehood or if it will ever become a real statehood. But they do have the universalist claim to spread their ideology, and they are realizing it across the borders, not within the nation-state borders. So this is yet again another important aspect of what we could call a Cold War or a real war, or both together. And if you ask me the question that, okay, so far so good, but I have not yet mentioned the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the classical conflict, the definitive element in the region, where is it? And I am very sorry to say that unless there is a bloody armed conflict going on in Gaza, when there is a relative calm in Gaza, then you don't see the Palestinian-Israeli conflict if you are looking at the region. It has been Syria, now it is the ISIS, and somehow we keep to forget about this conflict, which I believe is still crucial to everything that is happening in the region. But if we had Cold Wars and controversies, we also have the other dimension, cooperation, temporary alliances, even across the political and ideological divide on certain issues, and quite astonishing alliances. Over the Iranian nuclear issue, there is a quiet Israeli-Saudi coordination in the background. Over Syria, well, you could say that no agreement, but there's time and again come a proposal for a regional solution. Like a year ago, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Iran was proposed. Very interestingly, Israel was never mentioned as part of the solution. And of course, over ISIS, there can even be an Iranian-Saudi coordination. Maybe it's temporary. But as yesterday Lina said, and this is my last thought, as Lina said, that it seems that there is evolving a quiet Saudi acceptance of Iran as a regional power. I would rather go a little bit further, and I know it's very controversial what I am going to say, but it seems that there is a kind of a very, very delicate balance that on the peninsula it is the Saudi sphere of influence and no interference on that. But Iraq, when we look at Iraq, it rather seems that even if they don't like it, somehow they are accommodating to the situation, which is that in Iraq, Iran has much bigger influence at the moment than Saudi Arabia. So this is also part of the Cold War, and they are defining the spheres of influence. And at this moment, this seems to be the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erzsébet, for drawing out the elements of polarization in the region, but also the sort of readaptation and realignment patterns that seem to be emerging. Anna Selgomati.